Reflashing factory ECUs is becoming an increasingly common way of modifying the calibration data. Particularly with late model vehicles, it can be difficult or often impossible to replace the factory ECU with an aftermarket standalone. And there are a lot of options out there in the aftermarket when it comes to reading and writing from these factory ECUs. We're here with Jan from Autotuner to talk about their specific product. So if we talk about reflashing, and you come originally from the European car market, this has been traditionally very shrouded in secrecy, I would say. Particularly the tuners out there tuning these vehicles don't tend to want to share their supposed secrets. So what's caused that in this European market?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think it's part of the fact that the European market is it's a big community, but it's concentrated on a few German car makers that make the majority of the cars that today are being tuned from the European, at least on the European continent. And if you are a specialist at something, it's a bit of the European mentality that you try to gain this exclusivity and to maintain your client base and to be proud, to have these possibilities to tune these cars. And I think it's a bit of it's this fact of being proud on how you can tune the cars and what your capabilities are that led to this secrecy that you really don't want any other car maker or tuner to be able to make the same results as you do.
To be clear though, there are a few differences between the way tuners approach tuning some of these European vehicles, Volkswagen, Audi, just to name a couple, in terms of while there are commercial tools available such as yours, this differs from the likes of some of the commercial reflashing software. Naming here maybe the likes of HP Tuners, EFI Live, Cobb, for example. And the difference there is that these software packages give the end user access to read and write the ECU. Obviously, that's really important. And they also give a nice user interface that has defined maps. So there's no hard work from the user. In essence, if we want to make adjustments to the ignition timing, there will be a nice three-dimensional table available. We can recognize it, understand the numbers, and then make adjustments as we see fit. Now, in the European market, that traditionally hasn't been the way, and these tuners have actually been needing to essentially reverse engineer the factory calibration correct using software like WinOLS. So can you give us a brief overview of what's involved in that process?
Well, I think maybe one step back is to explain why there's a difference. I think there's a completely different market approach. Mm-hmm. This market approach difference is, first of all, I think derived from the fact that the European continent is much more, it's smaller and it's less open as, for instance, in the US, where typically you have to travel quite far to get to your local tuner. So in Europe, a tuner within an hour drive mile radius covers maybe 80% of its clientele. So it's right from this geographical difference that you have the possibility that you have other possibilities. So this is why the fact of having a tuner network where people come in and they tune your cars for you and you don't have to do anything, it's something that it's a business model that works, that we think that at least in the US it's more difficult to implement because you have these great distances and because you have a network. You would need to build a network that is so much more important if you really wanted to cover, and even then you have sometimes distances that are absolutely impossible to cover, and the population that is more difficult to cover. So I think this is the start of or this is one of the reasons why the approach is already very different. Mm-hmm. And this is why we have had a lot of success in the European on the European market, and this is why the US is something that needs to be tackled maybe in a different way, or at least where people in the US or in other countries than Europe need to be educated towards and need to understand.
Let's dive a little bit into the product so that people can understand what it is and just as importantly, what it isn't. Now, that example that I gave just before with some of these commercial reflashing packages, as I said, it's an all-encompassing product with the read and write capability, usually logging, and also the ability to actually visualize and modify the maps. Autotuner, on the other hand, focuses on a more narrow aspect of that, which, if I'm right, is reading, writing, and logging, correct?
Correct. It's a tool that is really destined to make the tune, but it's not something where we give an easy access to the end user. So it's a professional tool that we sell exclusively B2B, so business to business. So our end client is the shop or the tuner that himself goes towards the end clients. So for us, making an interface, it's not our business. We're not into the software business. We're into the giving you access to business, and this is what Autotuner does. So we're really providing the reading and writing and the diagnostics, obviously, that is absolutely paramount to a clean tool. This is the business model that from the previous question derived out of the geographical necessity and so forth.
Okay, so to give the full scope of ability and to have the ability to actually make those mapping changes, what are the options? I mean, I mentioned WinOLS. Are there other options that you would use with Autotuner in order to be able to make those mapping changes?
Honestly, I think the vast majority of our clients use WinOLS, but obviously there are some easier tools that have online editors. But I think that it's not something that we like to recommend because it's something that is so specific to everyone's needs that it wouldn't be fair, to the companies that make these different tools or software. But honestly, WinOLS is the de facto standard for these modifications, and this is typically what our clients use.
For those who haven't heard of WinOLS before, essentially it's a binary editor, so you can download the contents out of the ECU, any ECU for that matter, as long as you've got a reading and writing tool, and display that. And then it's a case of pattern recognition to go through and find the various maps that are important, define those maps and scale them so that then they make sense. Now, this is a skill that I find is certainly a little bit beyond the skill, very, very far removed from the skill of actually being able to tune an engine. So this is not the same as adjusting an air-fuel ratio or adding or removing timing and boost, etc. It is quite a unique skill set. So are there options around for tuning shops who want to get involved in this market but don't have the skill set to actually reverse engineer the ECU and find their own maps? Can map packs be bought that will give the tuner access?
Yes, correct. You have basically two big options. So you have what is called map packs that are sold basically every file service has also map packs that they're selling. This is something that gives you a better understanding of what this secret binary without any information includes. These map packs are very helpful, I think, for people that are in a more in a less advanced phase, let's call it like this. And but it's still something that I would recommend not anyone that hasn't a real complete understanding of how the engine works, how generally all these parameters work. I think it's really, really important to educate yourself in the whole process. I mean, this precise map understanding part is, I think, just one part of a whole educational journey that I assume you are obviously in the business of providing. And I think this is the importance, and this is what we see also with our clients. And we recommend our clients either to really go the scholar way of understanding something by learning it from A to Z, and the map packs, that's one of the steps that you need to do, but there is something before it and there's stuff after it, or obviously to provide to go find a file service that provides a complete solution.
So let's talk about these file services. There's a number of companies out there that will help you out through providing either a map pack through to a stage 1, stage 2, or whatever calibration that happens to be. And that sort of brings us also into the slave and master style of setup that is quite common with some of these tools. Is that something that Autotuner also provide?
Yes, so our tool has two different types of versions that we're providing. It's, as you call it, the master master version. That is the version where you have, when you read and you write, you have a complete access to the binary that you're extracting. And then you have the other side, the slave version, that is linked to a master, where you have the encrypted version of the data that you send to the master, who is usually the expert behind it and who knows how to modify it. So the slaves are usually shops that are distributed around a certain region, and then they do the reading and writing activity on the car and send the files, the binary that are encrypted, to their master, and this master then has the decryption keys, and with the open binary then does the modifications that are necessary to modify, and then send it back again to the shops that have the slave client. They connect it to the clients, to the end car, and the file is then written to the ECU.
So, and this style of master and slave setup is pretty common. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, assuming, of course, that you've got a good master tuner who's doing quality tunes. I guess it's worth mentioning that one of the potential downsides of this is the slave has no ability then to make small adjustments to their calibration, short of actually getting back in touch with the master tuner and having them make those changes. So it's purely a case of the slave doing the read, send it to the master calibrator, they'll send back the calibration, upload that into the ECU, and hopefully everything's good first time. That's sort of a good way of like talking about how that works.
Yes, correct. That's exactly the way how it works. It's true that any type of small modifications are not easily done by are not. I mean, it's impossible to do them by a slave, but it's there for a reason, because if you are not yourself the expert, even small changes can have huge impact and can endanger the engine. So it's in some way obviously limiting, but in I would say 99% of the cases, it's by design, and it's a good thing that it's there. Obviously, if you teach to more people the skills from A to Z how to do it, obviously then you have a growing user base of potential master clients that could either themselves have their network or just be, individual masters that just do it themselves. But it's clear that I wouldn't recommend someone who really hasn't, the in-depth knowledge of the entire process of how to tune a car to, go about and try themselves. This is why, honestly, if even the knowledge is there at 80%, I would still recommend to go to a file service, have something to good quality, obviously, file service, have something that is more or less what you want, and then understand it, or through courses, or through whatever. But I think it's because you're operating, if you're not operating on your own cars, it's something that is potentially dangerous, and that we obviously don't recommend.
Just going a little further into that as well, obviously not all file services are created equal. I mentioned you obviously want to align yourself in that slave position with someone with a really good reputation doing good work, and often they will also be happy to make those small changes as you go. And I mean, if you are starting out down that path and you have the intention of making your own calibrations, some of those file services will be happy to provide you with essentially unlocked calibrations. You can learn from those. Of course, there's some IP that goes into those that people want to protect. So, very much down to the individual. I just wanted to mention that. Now, one of the aspects with going down this path of tuning, of course, the European vehicles we've talked about so far, up until recently, there wasn't a lot of options in terms of commercial software packages like HP tuners didn't offer a lot of support. That is changing gradually, but still we don't have access to the wider range. But on the other hand, tools like your auto tuner essentially have the ability to read and write from essentially any ECU. So we're here in the US at the moment, obviously a massive market for US domestic vehicles. There are commercial reflashing packages like HP tuners available for those. So if someone wants to put in the work and doing their own definitions, what are the advantages of using Access Tuner to tune these US domestic market models that are already supported by other software packages?
Well, I think it's a different approach. I think if I understood correctly what you're asking, it's an alternative. It's an alternative in every sense of the word. We have not the same interfaces, the same approach to the clients as some of the competitors that you're mentioning. But our business model and the whole construction of using an external file service or doing it yourself, but from A to Z, but being able with your tool to do everything. I think it's just a different philosophy, and I think it's not something where I would say one is better than the other. It's just a different philosophy that gives I think on a say market clients more options, and it's interesting.
I'll actually go a bit deeper into that. Coming from a background where I owned and ran a commercial workshop, if we're using some of these commercial software packages, obviously they're commercial and therefore these companies need to make money. So they monetize the tuning, and some companies will charge a license fee for every vehicle that you want to unlock the ECU and tune.
Yeah.
Others, it will be a hardware interface that gets locked to a particular car. So for every car you need to tune, you actually have to have this hardware dongle or interface that goes with the car. Now, I don't want deep into that. There's pros and cons of both of those methods. The important thing that we haven't mentioned so far is while obviously for Access Tuner and any of these tools there is a significant upfront cost, they're not cheap. They're a professional tool. Once you've done the hard work, you've got the definition from a file service, or you've done it yourself, you can then tune hundreds of cars, thousands of cars. There's no ongoing cost, correct?
That's exactly right. And I think this is one of the advantages of having this into a dealer network, where you basically have an upfront, as you just said, an upfront cost that is a bit more steep, but you can scale it more easily. And I think this is what our customers have been really happy about, is that their return on investment is with every sale, it's proportionately smaller. So obviously you have it's the carrot on the stick that I'd like to say, because the more you do, the more proportionally you gain. I mean, in absolute and in relative value you gain. So it's something that, to me, and what we learned from the dealers that we serve and that we follow for many years, it's really what pushed them to be on the forefront in their particular market or in their particular field or whatever. Be really, the best that they can be. I think it's a kind of a motivation as well. It's financial motivation, but it's also it's just doing good business.
And I think for this product as well, you've already mentioned it, it's a business-to-business product. It is for professional tuners. So this isn't going to appeal to the average home enthusiast who just wants to tune their car. But for commercial tuners, this is really important, because you may be tuning 5-10 cars a week, and of course the individual license fees do stack up pretty quickly. All right, look, getting into the intricacies of actually using the product. So let's talk about the reading and writing. And we hear different terms. There's OBD2, there's bench reads, there's BDM. What's the differences between those three? What do we need to know?
I mean, basically, you have the three big categories. The OBD tune is where you connect the Autotuner tool to the OBD socket of your car. Mm-hmm. That is legally within a certain distance of the steering wheel. So this is easily accessible. It's something that gives you the advantage of easy to use, but has a disadvantage because it's not something that you can say universally, but a majority of the OBD protocols give you less access, or at least it's a more restricted access, given that you run through the whole car's system. So you are not directly accessing the ECU, but you go through the OBD port, and then you through some cables you reach the ECU at some point. So it gives you a less of a detailed read, in a sense that most of our OBD protocols, they provide you with a virtual read, meaning that you connect it, the Autotuner reads the software version, the car version, etc., and everything, and it aligns it with our database and provides you with a original file that we obviously have on our service, and it provides you with this file. This file gives you then the possibility to modify it, and the advantage being that whether you buy a new car or a used car, you don't have to worry about a car that already has been modified, where you then at some point maybe modify on top of something that is maybe wrong or dangerous or something. So you're starting from a clean slate that is secure and that we can guarantee is absolutely original.
Yeah, I think you can't make a big enough point about how important that is. It's something we really drum in with our reflashing courses, starting from something that's factory original, rather than working from a calibration that's almost certainly going to have some baked in errors. So that's really important. Of course, the downside is if you do have a tuned car and maybe the tune's absolutely fine, you're not going to be able to read that tune out of it using that virtual read. Let's move on to the other option, or the next option there, which is our bench read. So what's that entail in terms of complexity, and where's the advantage?
Well, it's I think the best compromise, because it's not that difficult to do. Basically, you have to extract the ECU from the engine bay. In most modern cars, this is something that is fairly easy to use. You obviously have some cars where it's in the wheel arches or somewhere behind, covers and everything. Especially on exotic cars, you have locations that are quite difficult. So in that case, my argument obviously doesn't hold. But for most cars, typically the cars that our customers tune most, it's fairly easy accessible. So you take it out, and then on the bench you connect different pins that we provide, obviously with our tool. You connect it to connect the ECU through those pins. This means the ECU remains sealed, so nothing needs to be opened, but you have a deep access to the ECU, meaning that you bypass the car's systems as such, and you have a more complete read of this. And you can, for instance, if you have a car that has been tuned already, you can see what's on this tune, and for instance, doing an incremental update for a tune that is almost perfect but needs a small adjustment, maybe a lower fuel rating where you just want to do a little less ignition, or you want to add an option, a little more burple sound or something.
But you're not starting from scratch,
But you're not starting from scratch, so it's something that you could add on top. And because you know what's on the ECU, so it gives you more flexibility. It's a bit more of a hassle. It's less convenient, but it's still something that gives you a good file. And it's a good way of, if you know that it's an original, and if you do a mistake, it's more probable that you can flash it back to a previous state where you can, if you did a mistake, or if there is some communication error, or if the battery hasn't, the battery that you connect, the tool is connected to a charger, and if the electricity, if there is some problem with that, you could potentially save it, or at least it's more savable in this state. So
let's sort of exaggerate that a bit, or amplify that a little bit, and basically what you're saying there is, if you're doing an OBD2 read, voltage to the car, voltage to the ECU is really important, and if that voltage drops down too low, you can get into some problems. And what you're really talking about there is having the ECU bricked. If you've done an OBD read, you may not be able to recover that. You're only really getting the tune information, whereas the bench read, you've got a complete read of everything inside the controller. Exactly. So if it does get bricked, you can most likely flash that back and recover it. That's sort of a quick recap of what you're talking about.
Exactly. That's fully it.
And I think that's really important for people to understand, because it's always a fear. Some of these more modern vehicles as well, if you did break the ECU and it was unrecoverable, that's a significant expense. All right, let's move on to the third option. And in some of these ECUs, unfortunately, we may have no option but to get a little bit down in the weeds with it. So BDM, what is that? What does it require?
Yes, I mean, what we call the boot mode is really a mode where you also, as with the bench mode, you extract the ECU out of the engine bay, but then you have to open it. So the difficulty is that most ECUs, in order to be weather resistant, are quite nicely sealed, which is good as such, but obviously for our shops is a bit more difficult. So you need to pry open some clamps or some so it's a bit of a hassle to open it. And then on the different depending on the model, you have to either solder or position the pins correctly so that you can access the different chips or the RAM very precisely. So it gives you, the deepest access to the ECU. It gives you the most direct access, but is much more difficult. You have exceptions where it's a bit more where it's really not that difficult, but in general, it's the most difficult way of doing, but it's also the most deep way of extracting information from the ECU, meaning that the probability of saving is the highest with this mode. So it's again the compromise. This is why I think the previous method is the good compromise between the two. Here it's better, but it's in times of if you're in a hurry, if you have 10 cars in your shop that you want to do the entire day, it's definitely going to slow you down. So it's something that our clients, while they do it for especially newer models where they want a real backup that is as complete as possible, it's still something that is not, it's not their favorite thing to do.
No, I can't imagine anyone getting too excited about that process, but sometimes a necessary evil anyway. Now, the reading and the writing, obviously really critical there to be able to perform the job of tuning. But when we're actually tuning, be it on the dyno or on the street, we're really blind to what's going on in that ECU without data logging and data analysis. So this is another element that the tool also provides.
Yes, exactly. To us, it's very important that when you tune the car, when you have injected a new software, that you are aware of what it does to your car. Maybe to go back one step, we obviously always recommend every client to do a log beforehand to know what's the car's health, what possible problems are pre-existing, and to fix those obviously before even touching the software. I'm assuming this is obviously something that you tell everyone fairly regularly.
Obvious, but no one ever does it.
Exactly. But once you did that, and once you are assured that everything from a technical and hardware perspective is in order, you do your tune, as we just explained by the three methods, and then ex post you have a data logging function that gives you the possibility to, on the dyno or on the street, to do a log. So it extracts information from the sensors of the car, it interprets them, and it puts them on a page where you can visually see what exactly the depending on the RPM range, depending on the gas pedal position, what the car did, what it made. Next to obviously the power curve that a dyno would give you, it's very important to see, for instance, if there is any engine knock, for instance, or if the fuel pumps are not being able to cope with the required pressure. So there's so many parameters that need to be looked at that while you're doing it, you're not able to see. I mean, you are able to observe maybe the boost pressure and maybe the throttle valve. These are typical things that people look out for. But there's so many parameters, and often we log more than 30 or 40 parameters at a single time, that you need to analyze this in order to see if your tune is successful, if there are things that you need to do better. And our tool really focuses on an easy, a good visual presentation. And for pros users, we have the possibility to export to a Excel file that you can then analyze in really every single line.
And that also would give you the ability in that .csv format, if you've got your favorite data logging analysis software that you're really familiar with, you can bring it into that and analyze it there. You don't have to do it inside of the tool.
Exactly. So this export function gives you pretty much the possibility to import it into any data analysis website or tool that you may want to use.
Okay, perfect. Well, hopefully that's given our viewers a little bit of more an understanding of what the tool is, and as I said, just as importantly, what it isn't, because I think there are a few misconceptions around these products. So thanks for your time today. If people do want to find out more about the product, where are they best to do so?
Yes, thank you very much for your time as well. Our website is www.autotuner-tool.com, and we're always happy to engage with our customers, obviously our potential customers. So we have a nice chat function that gives you the possibility to either ask technical questions or have more marketing or sales questions. So feel free to hit us up there, and we're happy to answer any question and to welcome every single new client.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.